Azur Purview. Azur Purview is a pre-release software, and it is actually a unified cloud-based data governance platform. So what does that mean? And I will be doing some, demos as well. So bear with me and feel free to ask questions. Actually, I'm going to take a second to make sure you guys all have access to mic. So feel free to jump in and ask questions where you need to. So you all have your mics enabled now. So here's the 4 categories of things that Purview is designed to do. Reimagining data governance in the cloud, and we'll talk about this a little bit. So don't fall for the marketing lingo. Set foundation for effective data governance, maximize business value of data for data consumers, and gain insight into data use across the estate. So what does all that mean? So let's take a look at it. So this is the sort of a conceptual diagram of everything that Purview does. So Purview is a quote unquote data catalog, right? So it is a data catalog. It maps data from multiple sources. But it does, what they did was they actually based it on open APIs, Apache Atlas 2.0. So anybody who's familiar with Apache Foundation Atlas 2.0, any code that runs on Atlas will run on Purview. So that's the good news about it, right? So it provides automated scanning. It provides classification and data map. And it also gives 3 separate views of data. So it segregates. So the basic platform is the catalog that comes, that comes and is available depending on your permissions. And then you also have 2 separate views based on the data producers and consumers, as well as the data officers and security officers. And we'll take a look at it a little bit. It integrates with Power BI, on-prem, Synapse, Azure Data Services, and M365 Compliance Center. So the governance piece of Purview is actually integrated with the M365 Compliance Center. If you have a company-wide policy defined in the M365 Compliance Center, Purview respects that. Okay, so let's take a look at Purview Studio. So this is what it looks like. What I'm going to do is I'm going to jump on and off the demo screens from time to time, because I really think that slide deck can only go so far. So this is my Data Geeks resource group that I created for this presentation. And as you can see, there's a few things here. And this is the Purview account. If I click on it, it'll take me to here, and it says Open Purview Studio. If I click on this, it'll bring me here. So I'm not going to click on it because I need that session open. This is what it looks like. So this is Purview Studio. This is what it looks like. You can immediately see that there's 4 things you can do. You can register sources, browse assets, and manage glossary. And then also there's Knowledge Center. I'm going to move back to the slide deck, and we'll go into, I'll jump from one to the other often. So this is, you can see that this is a similar view of Purview. This is just a slide deck version of it. So let's talk about a little bit. So you have home. This is a navigation menu on the left side that you saw. Home, sources, glossary, insights, manage. That's what it does. So home is, it's getting back to the basics. Sources is where you actually create collections, register data sources, set up scans, etc. Glossary is where you maintain terms, such as glossaries. And insights give you data insights, and manage gives you some ability to run some of the stuff. So let's take a look at some of this stuff. So I'm bringing back the web page here. So these are what I'm talking about, right? So I'm going to, first of all, let's go to register resources. I'll show you what's supported. So right now, this is my sort of sample stuff, so it doesn't have a lot. What you can do is you can actually register sources, and I just want to show you what's available to register. So as you can see, it's pretty comprehensive. You have Azure, AWS, Synapse, Amazon S3, Cosmos DB, Data Explorer. Let me see if I can this because you're not seeing the scroll bar. And you can see that there's a whole bunch of stuff. So you can connect to Data Lake, you can connect to MySQL, Files, Cassandra, Irwin, Hive Metastores, SAP, Power BI, SQL Server, Teradata, Oracle, all kinds of things, and more coming. Plus, so these are all the connectors available, and they keep releasing more. Plus, you can write your own connector so long as it's compliant with Apache Atlas 2.0, and it'll support it. So this is how you would go about doing it. So for instance, I'm just going to walk you through a few steps, and that's just to show you how it would work. Let's say we're doing this, continue. The way it would say is you can create an endpoint here, and then you can set it up. I'm not really going to do this because I already have something set up. So let's take a look at this. So this is a Azure-based SQL Server that I set up already, and it's telling me that, hey, you know, it's if I look at the source, this is the screen that you would go through if you were setting it up. I have this Data Geeks demo server that I created. I created the endpoint, and when I run the scan, I can say, hey, this is the endpoint. What database do I want to scan? And also, there's this concept of creating credentials. And this is important because from a governance point of view, what you're doing is that the person who's actually running the scan may not be the person who's setting up the connection, may not be the person who's looking at the scan data, right? So what we're doing is we're integrating everything through either we're integrating everything using Key Vault. So if you go back here, you'll see that in this we have a Key Vault that I deployed. And this is where all my secrets are. So in other words, you know, all your secrets are in, all your secrets are belong to the vault, and nothing is stored in Purview itself. And also, you have to go through the process of giving Purview access to the keys that you need, and so that way you can set it up. So that's a little bit about setting up data sources, and you can see that there's a ton of different data sources that you can set up. So this slide deck is just going to walk you through some of the things. These are some of the menu items. You get updates, and you can switch accounts, notifications, feedback here. Recently accessed sources. So this is the home page, and you can see that in this case, if I look at my home page, it's pretty anemic. It has 2 sources and 32 assets and 2 glossary terms because this is my demo account. But in a typical situation, what happens is you have hundreds and thousands of sources, right? So here we see that there are 1,000, whatever, more than 1,000 sources, 13,000 users, 76,000 assets, and 312 terms defined. So this is the catalog metrics part of it. And then, you know, you have the recently used stuff. You also have the search bar that allows you to search the catalog for something. So for instance, in my case, this is my demo, and I only have 2 sources. I can actually go and search for sales, and it'll show me all the sales things. So you can imagine that after you get to the point where you have tens of thousands of sources, you do want the ability to search. So that's what that's about. Moving on. So here's some of the security perspective. And this is these are the roles that are available for Purview. And again, depending on who you log in as, you can see certain things and you can't see certain things. And this is just a map of it. I will be sharing this PDF with everybody, so I don't expect everyone to memorize this. But the idea here is that there's a difference between data source administrator, data curator, reader, data source admin plus data curator, and data source admin plus data reader. So there's different things you can do based on what roles you have. Here's a look at what it would look like if you had a more organized view than I do. So if I look at my screen, and again, I'm going to bring in my screen. Let's go back here, register sources. You'll see that I have this blob of two random sources that I have. One is a SQL Server database, and then the other one is a data lake storage. That's cute, but in real enterprise scenarios, you have hundreds and thousands of sources. What you want is you want categorization, and that is available in the form of collections. So you define this collection. In this case, this is the North America data center versus the Europe data center versus whatever. And then within each collection, you can add as many sources as you like, right? So that's a organizational method for, especially when you're dealing with large sets of data sources. Let's take a look at this. We went through this. So this is just a, what kind of sources are available. And it lets you walk through. Also, the scope of the scan, you can scan everything as much, as little, or as often as you like, right? So I'll give you an example of this. Let's say that I want to run a scan for this Azure Data Lake storage. I'm going to continue. All right, this is not it. I need my proper connection. I can test connection. Continue. And if I run a scan, it's going to show me that, hey, my storage only has one container in it. Now, I can pick only one or all of them. In my case, it's only one, so I'll pick one. But it also gives me the ability to create a rule set for scanning. And then it also gives me the ability to have a schedule or a one-time scan. So it could be that I want to scan a data set just once to see what the metadata is. Again, this is a data catalog. So what we're doing is we're not collecting the data from our sources, but the metadata from the sources, right? Or we could set it up as once a month or once a week. Chances are that if you have a production source and it doesn't change very often, you're not going to scan it as often as you do something that's a rapidly changing thing. So, so you have the flexibility to do that. You can do this one. I'm going to pick one, and I'm going to say continue. And going back to the slide deck here. So you can also create filters. So the filter type is, hey, what kind of files do I want to? So in my case, I have the data lake has, some 13 or so files, which is nothing. We have clients that have Teradata size files, right, and multiple folders. You can actually create filters on what kind of files you scan and things like that. Also, we kind of scanned through this. This is the when I was doing the when I was walking through this, I'm not going to go over the whole thing, but there's this concept of rule set. So here's an example of what a rule set looks like, and we'll take a different view of this from a different screen in a minute. The idea here is that you want to scan your data based on what it is, right? So if it's production data, you definitely want to scan it using all kinds of rule sets. But if it's just test data, maybe you don't care so much about certain rules. And it's taking a while to load, but we'll go to it using another view. So here's what this should bring up. And basically what this is if you are if you're somebody who's worried about government regulations, you can choose that rule set. If you're worried about personal data, such as name, email, zip code, phone numbers, you can use that, social security number, security, miscellaneous. And we also have a way to create these rule sets, and I'll walk you through that in a minute also. And then here's the scheduling part we talked about. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the browse and search, but we did do a very basic search. And here's the result. And now in the search, you can also have all kinds of filters, right? You can filter based on glossary terms. You can filter based on classification, contact, and so on and so forth. And I'm going to, I'm not going to go over a lot of this because I'm going to show you some of this stuff. Actually, let's go back here. Let's go back to here. And I want to talk about lineage and classification a little bit as soon as this comes back. All right, so let's browse assets. So here's the stuff that's already been defined in my system. And notice that, the two register sources are SQL Server and Gen 2, but the database and the Azure account is inherited by that. And also I have an Azure Data Factory that's been inherited. So let's take a look at this Gen 2 and take a look at this. We ran a couple of scans on this. And here's the files that exist. So let's take a look at, for instance, the sales address. So you can actually take a look at a deep dive into each one of your assets, and you can take a look at what the schema looks like. Okay. You can also take a look at what the lineage is. So what does that mean? The lineage is telling you where the data originated. So as you can see, this file, the sales LT address.csv, actually came through a data factory pipeline from the database that exists in Azure. So this is the lineage part. This is kind of neat because especially for those of you who are running hundreds of ETLs, especially using data factory pipelines, or even if you're not using, this is a great way to kind of have a view of all pieces of your data and where it's coming from. So I wasn't kidding when I said, all your data is belong to us. So that's a little bit about that. You can browse your assets. So let's take a look at, like, for instance, the SQL Server database. We see that there have been scans. So what's going on here? This is a schema. Here's the same table. This is a source table. And as you can see, that it says, hey, this schema has classifications. There's world cities classified in the schema. And we can take a look at the schema, and it says, hey, wait a minute, I found city, and I know how to classify it. This is a world city. And then also there's lineage. So the lineage here is showing you that this is the source for something that ends up as a CSV file. Okay. There is a contact and related available, so you can see the relationships here. The contacts, you can define contacts for each asset. So for each piece of asset, you can kind of say, hey, I want, I don't know, Barkha to be the owner, the expert of this, and somebody else to be the owner. And so this is useful when you have complicated data that lands into a file and you're trying to figure out who to contact about this data, the quality of the data or whatever. So any questions, guys? Is this, is this making sense? Is this interesting? Any comments? All right, so in that case, I'm going to continue. So asset and lineage is very useful, especially when you're doing complicated transforms, right? So for instance, if you, here's an example. I worked with a client that had about 500 Power BI reports, and they wanted to, and the person who wrote it had left the company, and they wanted to understand what data source was coming from each one of the Power BI reports. Well, they used, they connected to those reports, and they were able to actually get an information of where all the data was coming from. So this is a great way to be able to figure out the lineage for each one of those reports. So here you can see that this is the Power BI workspace, where this is the actual report. This is the dashboard. These are the widgets. This is the data source within Power BI. And then you can kind of see that it's coming through Synapse. And then there's a data pipeline that's preparing it, and it's coming from Terraform. And there are some web logs and whatnot. So you can see the whole pipeline. So this is very important, very useful, easy win for, especially for people who are running, complicated data estates. All right, let's talk a little bit about contacts. So I mentioned this, that for each asset you register, you can edit and add a contact. You can create experts and you can create owners. So this is a very agile worldview of your data. You actually have a view into who's the owner of this data. So you can reach out to Oscar to find out, hey, what's this data all about? And also, who to reach out about, questions. Hey, what quality should the data be? How reliable is it? Is it a primary source? Is it secondary? So on and so forth. Also, there's a relationship. So you can see, and I showed you the screen a little bit. You can see the relationship, and you can see it in the hierarchy of data. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about business glossaries. So you have the ability to create multiple business glossaries. The importance of this is that we all have been in corporations where the IT team calls an order, but the sales team may call it something else, right? I don't know, source or client or whatever. So having a business glossary is important, and Purview definitely allows you to do that. So let's go back here and let's go home and go to manage glossary. And I've created just two, again, kind of, lame example of things in the glossary. You can create multiple glossaries. You can import terms. You can create terms. Let's create a new term. So let's see. Let's say that I'm a marketing person, right? And I want to define everything, but I want to define everything that has a extra attribute that is related to marketing. I can create a new template for this. And blah, blah, blah. And I can also add a new attribute. So this is, this is an art attribute. Now, when I create a new term, I can say, hey, I want to use the marketing template. So now my term is, let's say I'm creating address again. Address. And I have some description. I can, you can select parent or not. But you have this additional attribute that has some additional information, right? So, and you can use acronyms. So it may be that, it's called street address in one place, address in another place, something like that. So you can create that. And here we go. We've got a new address. Now, when you start it, it's going to be in the draft phase. You kind of have to edit it. And I generally add contacts. Before I save it, so that if anybody's looking at that and going, what the heck is an address to? You can go and see who to contact about this, right? So you can create your glossary. The good news about this is that when you go back and you actually look at your browse assets, if you rescan, the glossary terms will show up. So in other words, you can go here, look at your sales LT address. I don't know if it's going to show up here because we haven't run the glossary term, but this is where it would show up if I rerun the scan. So that's one way to look at it. You can also see, there are no glossary terms at this point, but if you define your glossary terms, it'll show up over here. So that's a little bit about glossary. Let's walk through the slide deck some more. Here's an example of all kinds of glossary terms and status. It allows you to define a common language between different groups. It also allows you to relate languages from different departments. And also it gives you the ability to add additional information, new attributes, whatever is needed in whatever view, okay? So here's, we walked through this. And here's a bird's eye view of the data inside. So in this case, now these guys have hundreds of assets registered. If you look at my data insights, you won't see any of this because I have two sources. But here's an example of what you can see. You can take a look at how much of your data belongs in what kind of source, and also what is the top classifications. So it'll show you what classification is. And this is one way to look at it. I'm going to talk about, we do have some scans, so let's talk about scans, right? So this is where we are. So here's some scans. I've done a few scans. I did 3. So this is just a view of scans. I don't really have any assets inside because I don't have enough stuff. I do have 3 glossary terms, and I have some classification data. I don't know if it's going to show anything or not because it takes, some of this data is delayed because this is reporting data. And one of the things I do want to talk about is sensitivity labels. Now, again, I'm not showing any sensitivity labels because it's a very small data set. But the way sensitivity labels would work, so this is what a glossary would show up as. It'll show you that, a customer is the highest used glossary term and, other things. And there's also reports on classification. There's a report on sensitivity labels. So let's talk about this. I'm not able to demo this for you because the way the sensitivity labels work in Azure is that it's actually a policy definition, and the policy is defined at the M365 center, policy center. And so what you do is you define your policies there saying, hey, if there's any, let's say social security numbers, they all need to be encrypted. And if that policy is applied, what'll happen is the scan will reveal what kind of data exists where and whether it is a policy failure or not. So this is the kind of stuff you can do. If you are running a data estate for a large company and you find that, hey, developers are throwing files on a Azure data lake somewhere or a storage account, you can run these sensitivity label scans and say, hey, wait a minute, this file contains XYZ and ABC. And this is a good way of you to sort of govern data, no matter where it lives. So it could be a data lake, it could be database, it could be Excel files, it could be PDF files, whatever, it doesn't matter. It'll scan, this will scan it and it'll find any, sensitive data in its location, and you can run audits on that data then. So this is the money. When I do this presentation for security and audit teams, this one wins, right? Here's an example of file type. So this is just a view of what extensions exist in your data estate and where. What else? All right, so let's look at the management center. So this is the final. So we're going down this list, as you can see. So this is a look at the management center. I'm going to actually go here. Again, this is a view of who can see what. Again, I'll make this PDF available on the Discord server, so you'll have access to this. This is just the account information. Also, there's this concept of the integration runtime. So it doesn't matter where your data is, whether it's on your cloud, somebody else's cloud, as well as on-prem. You can connect to it using integration runtimes. So you can create self-hosted integration runtimes to access data no matter where it is. Let's talk about classification. So let's go back to here. So there's this concept of classification and classification rules. So as you can see, by default, you get a ton of classifications. So you have ABA routing number, age of an individual, DNI number from Argentina. So you can see all these classifications. Basically, what it is data patterns. And so when we are scanning metadata, it'll actually scan the data and pre-classify. So when you saw that world cities in my address, that happened because of this, because there's already a classification called world cities. So let's look for it. There you go. So this is a Microsoft government city name. Description of this world city. And it's defined using, some list. So you can classify using an existing list, a pattern, a name, or other ways. So, and then here's the rules. So the rules actually tell you how an ABA number is classified, how an age of an individual is classified, and all those things. So let's create a custom classification. So in order to create a custom classification, first we create a custom rule, right? So this is BH test. I'm going to come up with that. Actually, it's the other way, right? So let's do that. Let's create a classification, custom, new, BH test, description is this, okay. And now we're going to create a rule to classify that BH test. So rule, blah, blah. We're going to call or look for BH test. And then here's a way to classify something. You can classify using a regular expression or a dictionary. So I'll give you an example, right? US states, you can do it using dictionary. You can also do it using regex, but regex for it would be slightly long. You can just upload a dictionary, which just defines all the states. Or you can do regex. And the way you can do it is you can either upload a file. You can also look for either the data or the name of the column. So you can do either or both. So in some cases, so for instance, a person's name, right? Person's age, right? Person's age is going to be, the data pattern is numbers, right? So that's too general of a classification. You may have to define it by saying it's a numeric pattern as well as the column name has something called age or something like that, right? And then also there's this thing called minimum threshold. So now imagine that you're trying to classify a database that's a terabyte, right? If you try to classify it at 100% threshold, it'll read all the data, all the terabyte worth of data to classify it. Or you can say, hey, classify it using 10% or 5%, right? So in something like that, if you know that your data is well defined, so in other words, you have rules, you have clean data, but you want to classify anyway, and you want your classification to not take hours, then you set the threshold to be low. And that way you can have faster classification as opposed to, you know, the default is about 60%, I think. And that can get high for data that you know is clean, right? So that's an example of what it would be. I'm not going to go ahead and do that. Any questions on classifications? And then finally, one of the things that I want to talk about is this lineage connection. So this concept of lineage is very useful within Purview. And the reason for that is because you can find out where your data is coming from, what stages it went through, and where it landed. And in some cases, you don't want to define one at a time. So what you can do is you can just register your data factory or your data share. And when you do that, what happens is I've already registered this data factory. If you look at this, this is my data factory. There's only one pipeline here that I created to do some copying files, right? But the good news about this is that when I register a data factory, it automatically registers all the pipelines within it. So you don't have to go and say, hey, monitor this pipeline, monitor this pipeline, monitor this pipeline. And what'll happen is every time you run this pipeline, there'll be a scan that happens automatically. So you can do that. So let's go here and go to Browse Assets, and let's take a look at this data factory, and you'll see that it'll show that, hey, it only has one pipeline, which is correct, and it ran once, and this is what it did. And here's the lineage. So it's a pipeline that copies all the tables from the database and puts them in files on the data lake. So it'll show you all the stuff that it did within the pipeline. Now, this is a very simple pipeline that I created for the purposes of the demo. In your case, this could be a lot more complicated than that. So that's as much as classification. Okay, so that's all the demos I have. I do want to, this is a preview product and we're still working on it. There's a lot of neat stuff coming. So I want to open up for questions and see if anyone has any questions. Usually the questions that I get are related to cost. And so just so you know, the only time you get charged is, well, you do get charged per user, but it's trivial. It's like $1 a month or something. But you do get charged every time you run a scan. So that's one of the reasons why we want to optimize scanning. And so, you know, if you have 10,000 data sources and you're running scans on it every hour, every day, that can get expensive. But for the most part, the scanning is the part that that gets expensive. So. And then finally, if you want to contact me, just go to my link tree. It has all my socials and my links and websites and such. So feel free to go there. And I want to thank you all for coming and attending this show. I'll stay here. I'll stop recording. Feel free to come off mute and ask questions if you want.